Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Sharp Weekly. In this video, we're going to continue our to-do list application in SwiftUI integrated with a JSON API implemented in Node.express.js. So in the couple of videos that we have discussed, you saw that we can go ahead and return an array of to-dos. We can also delete a particular to-do. But what about adding a to-do, creating a new to-do item? So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. Once again, I'm going to start from the server, because if we cannot get the server to work, there's no point. We should just go ahead and first make sure that the server is working, and only when the server is working, then we should move to the client side. So let's go ahead and start with app.post. Post means that we are creating data, posting data. To-dos, so that's the URL, that's perfectly fine. Now over here, you will see that the URL which I'm using is to-dos, and let me go ahead and open up this one. And for the get, I'm also using to-dos. So although the URL is the same, but how you invoke the URL is different, because over here I'm using post, and over here I'm using get. So it's completely different protocols that I'm using to invoke a particular URL. It's going to take in request and response. Okay. Now the client will be sending in the title and the priority. So we need to make sure that we can extract out the title and the priority from the body of the request, which we can easily do by saying request.body.title. And the same thing we're going to do with the priority, request.body.priority. Now, once we have the title and the priority, we can construct a new to-do object. To-do title will be title, and priority will be priority. Now, one of the things that is missing in this to-do object is the ID. So we need to construct the ID too. So what I'm going to do is put an ID, but I can't simply say 4, because next time when a person adds a new item, new to-do, it's not going to be 4, it's going to be 5. So for now, we can go ahead and say to-dos.length, so array length plus 1. So whatever the length is, just add 1 to it. Now, in actual application, this ID is actually generated from the database. Now, we don't really have a database, so that's why we're doing this kind of a thing. But if we had a database, we would just get an ID from the database. So now we have the to-do object. We can simply go ahead and say to-dos.push the to-do object. And that's it. Since we don't really have a database, our array is being used as a database, and that's why we're adding the to-do object to to-dos array. We still need to respond with something. So response.json, success true, message, whatever message task has been created. It doesn't really matter what. Just make sure that you're sending something back. Now, one other thing that we need to do is we need to tell Express how to parse JSON, because the body over here will be JSON. And we don't really have to install any additional packages, because we can simply say app.use and express.json. This is kind of like called the middleware. This means all your requests, post and get, are going to pass through this JSON middleware or the body parser middleware, and then it will be able to parse that body in the form of JSON. If you don't do this, then you will not be able to read these values. So make sure that you have the body parser set up for JSON. Okay, that is pretty much it. So now let's go ahead and see that how we can check this out. Now, I'm not going to jump into the client and implement anything. I'm going to use Postman. As we learned last time, that it is always a good idea to use Postman for your networking call or some other tool like Postman. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy this URL. So the URL remains the same, like this one. The method is now post. So I'm going to select post. We also need to set some headers. We need to tell the server that the content type that we are sending is application JSON. So make sure that we set it to application JSON. For the body, I'm going to select raw. Raw simply means that I'm going to be writing whatever the body is. And since I have set the headers to content type application JSON, when I click on the body, it automatically selects this as JSON. So this means I'm about to write JSON, valid JSON. Now, valid JSON is not this. This is not valid JSON, all right, because this has to be inside quotes. And whatever the thing that you want to do, clean the house. The other thing that we are trying to send is priority, and I'm going to just say hi. Now this title and this priority will be sent as part of the request body, and that is exactly what we are trying to extract. Title and priority. So make sure that the naming is absolutely correct. So if you send in over here name and priority, the name will kind of like be ignored because you're not even extracting out the name, you're extracting out the property of the body, which is called title. So make sure that you're sending title. Let's go ahead and send the request. Okay, so we get task has been added, success. That is the response we are getting. Let's go to the get route. You can see that this is a get route and perform a request. So now we should be able to see our new task being added, and it is there, clean the house. All right. Let's go ahead and create another task. Get a haircut. Priority is low. And now we can go to our get route and we can see, there we go, and the ID is 5. So it looks like our server is working perfectly fine, and now it will be a good idea for us to move to the client side, meaning the SwiftUI side. All right, so now let's go ahead and move to the client side, and we will implement the code that will be responsible for adding a new to-do list item. So I'm going to start with the web service because that is where we have to actually create the request and everything. Inside the web service, let's go ahead and start with create to-do item. We're going to pass in some sort of a URL, and we will get some sort of a pretty much like a basic response or a generic response back. So I'm just going to go ahead and say result. We're going to get a just generic response, whatever the response is. And the other part will be the network error. This closure is not really going to return anything, so that should be okay. Now, based on the URL, we can create a URL request. So request.URL request, passing in the URL. We need to make sure that the HTTP method is set to post because now we are actually posting. Now, one other thing that we set up when we were using Postman, if you remember correctly, is the headers. Right over here, you can see the headers that we selected. So we still need to set the headers when we are using our client, which is a SwiftUI application, so that we can tell the server that we are about to make a request, which is a special kind of request, which is JSON application, JSON. And let's see, let's add header or add value. The value that we are adding is application JSON. So we're going to just type application JSON. And for a header field, which will be content type. Perfect. We still need to get the body. What kind of an item are we trying to create? And you can see over here, I haven't even passed anything, no body, nothing. So that's not good. We will pass in a to-do item, which will be of type to-do. All right. Now let's go and take a look at the to-do item. Now, one of the things about this to-do item is the ID property. Now, I don't really have the ID property right now because I'm just about to create the item. So probably I should be making this optional. Now, as soon as I make this optional, because I don't really have an ID property or any ID because I'm trying to create an item, we will get an error and we will have to resolve this particular error. So you can see over here that now we are in a problem because we don't really have an ID property over here. So this means that now we need to figure out that what are we trying to do? I mean, are we trying to return some sort of a different ID, or are we trying to just go ahead and say this is also optional, which is going to perform a chain effect and it's going to break somewhere else now. As you can see over here, it's breaking to-do item dot something. All right. So we need to fix all of these different things. I think there are multiple places. You can see over here, it's causing an issue. So we need to find out how to solve this problem. So we will go over here and we will probably just going to say let guard, this is what, to do item ID, and we will say to do item dot ID. We will unwrap it. Else, if it's not able to unwrap, then we're not going to do anything. And we're going to pass in the ID. So that should take care of hopefully that problem. All right. Let's go back to our web service. We still have to make the request. So URL session.shared.data task with a request, passing in the request, getting the completion handler, response, error, and resume. For the first part, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to get some sort of a data back. So let's go ahead and do that. After that, we can decode the data into more of a generic response that we are trying to get. So we can say JSON decoder.decode. And once again, we are using the generic response because our server is pretty much not really sending anything interesting. It's just saying success, true or false. And that's the reason that we are actually sending in a generic response back. Just like over here. And now we can go ahead and call our generic response, passing over here in the success. Okay. So that should do it. Now, still we need to call the function which is create to-do item from our to-do list view model, which is this one. But another question is, how is the to-do list view model going to get access the data from our fields? Well, we don't really have any fields or any text boxes. If you look at our page right now or our screen, you can see we simply have a list, but there's no place for a person or a user to type in the title of the to-do list item. So we will need to add something over here. Text field. And we can say enter title. And over here, for the binding expression, either we can create a state variable inside the content view, or we can bind it to something inside the to-do list view model. So let's use the second approach, to-do list view model dot, and we can say to-do title text field, a little bit descriptive as you can see. No prompt, nothing. We don't really have anything called to-do title text field. So we can go inside our to-do list view model and create that. To-do title text field, string. Initially, it will be nothing. Now, one of the things you will notice, and I can actually show it to you if I go ahead and run the app right now. Let's go ahead and run it. And sorry, there's a thunder going on outside, so you might be hearing a lot of thunder. So let me go ahead and run the app. And one thing you will notice is as soon as I start typing something in the text field, you will notice some messages in the output window. All right, so let's go ahead and first launch this. It's going to take a little bit of time to launch because we are launching for the first time. So here's our text field. It's kind of barely visible right there. And I will click on it and I will say, clean the car. And you can see right there in our output window, it's basically saying binding string action try to update multiple times per frame. Because what's going on is that every single time I am typing something in the text field, it is trying to bind to do title text field, but to do title text field property is not really marked with published. So we need to make sure that this is marked with published so that it does throw an event or a notification. We're not really doing anything with that notification, but still it's a good idea to do that, or else you will get these errors or warnings in Visual Xcode 13. Mow the lawn, and now you can see that it is not giving anything. All right, great. Let's go ahead and try to make sure that our text field appears at least a little bit nicer. So we will need to add a little bit more padding to it. You can see it's still loading, and sometimes it can take a while. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and say that the text field style will be a rounded border. Okay, and it might be a good idea to give it a little bit more spacing. So I can just add spacing to everything by adding a spacing to our VStack. All right, so that looks perfectly fine now. The other thing that we need to add are 3 different priorities, right? We have a high priority, medium priority, and a low, or low, medium, high. So how do we create that priority? Well, there are multiple ways. We can probably use a picker control. And in the picker control, for now, just to build it out, we can use the approach of basically this one. So let's say priority, selection, where the data is going to go. So I think it will be string. So I'm just going to say to-do list view model dot selected priority and the content that you want to display. So I can go ahead and say over here low priority and medium priority, and I can say high priority, and I can also set the picker style to be segmented, because we can use the same thing to create more of a rotary control also. So there is no such thing as selected priority. So let's go ahead and add that option. Publish var selected priority, and by default it doesn't really select anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and say medium for right now with a small like this, medium. And going back to the content view, we will provide some tags. The tag is going to make sure that that particular priority is selected. And the tag, I'm just going to go ahead and say low, medium, or high. I mean, you can use capital letters also. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing, it's not like you have to use small letters or anything like that. All right, let's go ahead and see what's going on. Probably have to use a $sign over here because this is a bindable expression. And hopefully we'll be able to see the picker view with segmented with, I believe, the medium option being selected. Let's go ahead and run it again. Here we go. So you can see the medium option is now selected. I can select low, medium, high, enter title. So everything looks fine now. All right. Perfect. So every time we select these low, medium, or high, the value that we are selecting, the actual tag, which is in lowercase, low, medium, or high, is going to be sent to selected priority. So this particular selected priority is automatically going to get populated. All right. The final thing that we want to add perhaps is a very simple kind of a button. button, and you can just say add task, just to be very simple. And there's our button. We can add a little bit of a padding on the top of the button. So edges, top, let's say 10. Okay, that's perfectly fine, I guess. All right, so enter title, low, medium, high, and add task. Boom. Now we need to work on adding an actual task. So meaning, like when you click the button, what should it do? So let's go to our to-do list view model. You can see that there is no function that is doing anything related to adding a new task. So let's go ahead and do that. I can go ahead and say create to-do item. I don't really need to pass anything to the function because these two are bindable properties. So as soon as I'm writing something, it's already getting populated. So technically, I don't really need to pass anything. I already have the value that I need due to binding. All right. Now, inside the to-do list view model, perhaps I can create a new to-do item. Title or the ID, we don't really have to provide, but for the title, I can simply pass in the to-do text. Actually, it should be called to-do text, not text field. It should be called just a to-do title because it's not really a text field, right? It's just a string. So let's go ahead and first fix that part. I don't really like the name to-do text field. It's implying that it's an actual text field. It's not an actual text field. It's just the value of the text field. So that's a to-do title and selected priority. Okay, so now we have a problem that you can see that we are not providing the ID over here. So let's go back and let's go ahead and say var over here, not let. Okay, perfect. And finally, now we can start, let's go to build it again, start using the web service. So web service dot create to-do item. We need to pass in the URL, which we don't have. We need to pass in the to-do item, which we have. So I can pass in that, and I will get some sort of a result, which we can do something about it. But what about the URL? We need the URL also. All the URLs are implemented right over here in our constants URL. So I can go ahead and say static let create to-do URL, which will be URL string. And the URL is actually the same as the get route. It's how you invoke the URL that's different. So we're going to use the same URL. Going back, I can go ahead and try to pass in the URL, constants.urls.create to do URL. We will get some sort of a result that we can switch over perhaps. And now we can get case for success. You can see that we are getting a generic response. So we're going to get a response if let response equals to response, and if the response dot success, then so if everything is added successfully, we can perhaps, after adding a new item, we can populate the items. On the other case, we will have a failure, which will result in an error, and we can simply go ahead and display the error on the screen. Well, not on the screen, but somewhere over here. And probably should use a let over here. All right. So this means that when we call create to do item, it's going to create a new DTO object or the model using the title that you put in the text box and the priority that you have selected. And it's going to perform this web service request of creating a to-do item, getting a response. And when it gets a response, it's going to repopulate everything. All right. So now the only thing we need to do is to call create to-do item. So let's go back to our content view. And on the button itself, we can say to-do list item dot create to-do item. Again, we don't really need to pass anything to the create to-do item because as soon as you type something in the text box, it is populating the view model to-do title property and the selected priority property. Let's go ahead and build it. and let's go ahead and run it. If there's any problem, we'll need to fix it, but let's go ahead and try to run it. Okay, so we have different things that are being added. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back over here and just going to press space, space, space and save it so that we lose some of the things that we added, like some of the tasks. So now we will only have 3 tasks. There we go. Let's go ahead and add a task, get a haircut, and that's a high priority, add. So now you can see that some problem going on, right? It's completely empty. So we need to find out what just happened. I mean, when we selected or when we added a new task, why is it coming out to be completely blank? Where did we mess up? So let's go ahead and find that out. All right, so we're having some issues that when we say add, it doesn't add. So let's see where the problem is. If you go to the web service, one thing you will notice is that although we have set up the request and HTTP method and also the headers for application JSON, we never used our to-do DTO object or the model and pass it to the server. So if you're not passing the to-do item you want to add, guess what? It's never going to add that item because you never actually passed it. So we need to make sure that the body is being passed. And for the body, I can't simply just assign to-do item like this because a body has to be in the form of data. But luckily, the to-do, which we have created the model, is conforming to codable protocol. This means that it can be encoded and decoded. In this case, we don't really need decoding, we need encoding the actual object into data. So we're just going to go ahead and call JSON encoder.encode and passing in the to-do object. This can blow up, so we're going to make sure also to call this with try optional. So that's the first thing. Let's go ahead and run it right now to see if that fixes our issue. So we have 3 default tasks that are added. Now I can say clean, not clean, but let's say get haircut. And I will say add. And there we go. We got get haircut being added. Let's go ahead and also say something else. Let's say clean house, add. And there we go. We can see that the clean house is also being added. Let's go ahead and change something. Like if I say clean house 2 with high priority, you can see that it is also being added to high priority, or clean house 24 or something with low priority. So everything looks like is working perfectly fine. All right. So you can see that if you divide a task into smaller micro task, then everything just starts to make more sense and you will move a little bit more quicker. If we were to create our post route and start checking it with our client by implementing SwiftUI, then we have 2 points of failure. Our server might not be working, but our client might be at fault. So that's why we always use Postman or networking tool to first make sure that the server is acting as it should be, and then we move to the client side, which is our application. So this is great. We have learned how to create, read, delete, and the only last thing remaining is the update, which will be covered in the future video. So I really hope that you are enjoying this and you're learning a lot how to integrate SwiftUI with a JSON API implemented in Node and Express, but it can be implemented in any way you want as long as the medium is JSON. Thank you so much. If you like this video and want to support my channel, then the best way would be to check out my courses on Udemy. I have a lot of different courses on Udemy about SwiftUI, Combine, MVVM design pattern, RX Swift, ARKit, and so much more. If you're just starting out with SwiftUI, then I would suggest my course, which is SwiftUI Declarative Interfaces for any Apple device. This is a 25.5 hours course, and that is going to cover everything you need to know to get started. But then as you learn more and more and want to learn more about or advanced stuff, then you can jump onto different things like SwiftUI with MVVM design pattern. You can also learn about different kind of recipes for SwiftUI. You can see 100+ recipes that you can use with SwiftUI. All right, so a lot of different courses, and for the links to the courses, please check out the YouTube description to make sure to use those links because those are referral links, so that's going to definitely help you. Thank you so much. Subscribe to the channel, share the channel, and thank you so much for your support.